Hey, Kevin Martin here, your UT admissions guy, and I'm here today with Nicholas, who is a soon-to-be enrolling UT Austin computer science student for the class of 2024, and I'll pass it off to Nicholas and let him introduce himself.
Hey, so as Kevin said, my name is Nicholas. I will, I guess, introduce myself in terms of my stats. First off, so I had a 36 ACT. I had a 1560 SAT. My class rank as of my mid-semester was 15 out of 846. Prior to mid-semester, so going into senior year, it was 18 out of 846. I have a weighted GPA of 4.755. I'm an Eagle Scout. I was a GT student. I worked at Code Ninjas. I participated in my school's robotics team as a website developer. I state qualified and was the captain of my UIL journalism team. I played varsity lacrosse all 4 years of high school, and I was the captain of my speech and debate club my junior year and participated all 4 years of high school. I did fairly well in competition, state qualified 3 out of 4 years, and nationally qualified once. And then I have volunteering service that mostly focuses on environmental groups, especially with the Houston Arboretum and the Katy Prairie Conservancy. I live in the Katy area, and I think that's all I have to introduce about myself.
Yeah, you got the laundry list. I mean, it's always the first thing people ask when I see students report their application outcomes on College Confidential or Reddit. It's always like, "What are your stats, bro?" And then you have to give them like this like caged portfolio of what you've done. But the reason I wanted to interview you is because I feel like you're an applicant who is so much more than their stats. And obviously you're impressive in terms of your academic accomplishments and you have an extensive resume. But what I think is really cool about you is you think a little bit differently about some of these larger questions about society and academics. And so, yeah, I appreciate you taking the time today. I just want to ask you, like, how are you doing? Like, how's senior year going? Like, what's happening with yeah, enrolling at UT? Like, what's your experience been like having graduation canceled and all this?
Enrolling at UT was really cool. I was really happy when I finally did it. It felt like a weight off my chest in a way to finally just make the official decision. Senior year was going good up
Yeah.
until a few weeks ago. Um, yeah, but it was going really well. I still think that, my prom and my graduation is going to happen in some aspect. So I'm kind of happy about that. And, um, and then, beyond that, just kind of like life in general. Working at Code Ninjas has been interesting. We've moved to virtual classes. So I've been teaching 4 to 6 hours of Zoom classes a day with 20 plus kids each hour. And that's been certainly interesting. It certainly stinks, though. I definitely feel bad for teachers across the country. Um, and then throughout the second semester of my senior year, I was able to get a lot of freelance work, which was cool and different compared to my other years of high school. Um, and I think that, yeah, it pretty much summarizes this little last half of my senior year.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about teaching like 8-year-olds on Zoom and like some of the issues you've encountered with, yeah, some of their shenanigans?
Well, I've learned a lot of new internet memes, like so many. It's incredible. Like, I don't even know. I can't even list them all to you. I don't even remember them all. Some of it's been like shocking. There's a whole other area of YouTube that most people above the age of 14 will never see.
Okay.
And one thing that has surprised me and that has been really incredible that I didn't expect was the number of Rick rolls.
So that's still a meme that's still going strong.
It's still going strong with these kids, man. They'll ask for help and I'll be like, okay, share your screen. It's just a Rick roll. And that happens at least at least twice an hour.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah, I imagine you've got some parents that like want their like 10-year-old kids to like being doing all of the things the most, like even during pandemic times. Do you find that they're just like not that motivated, or they're like, do you like with the Zoom thing? Because when you're in person, you can sort of get a better idea of their nonverbals and whether they're awake or asleep. Like, how is it to gauge their like attention and motivation when you're all cluttered on a screen?
It's generally impossible. I have no way of doing it. Like in the beginning, I was actually trying to like teach the way I would in the regular center, where I would like actually explain a concept and try to get them to like answer questions and then check their understanding. But I gave up on that a long time ago. It's just too impossible
Yeah.
when you're on the Zoom call. So what I do now is I'm using this website called CodeHS, which has like free programming lessons, and all of Code Ninjas is using that right now. And basically we create a class and then we sign all of our kids up for it. So it could be Python or JavaScript or HTML. And then you kind of just tell these kids, okay, do as much of it as you can in this hour-long session we have, and I'm here to answer questions. And you kind of just let them pace themselves. And some kids are like super motivated and they're getting through
Mm.
12 sections in 1 hour. Other kids are only doing like one or two. And just is how it's going and how it is.
Yeah, that's a challenge. How did you get that job to begin with? I know a lot of students, especially younger students watching this, might be interested in how they can leverage their computer science and programming skills to get a job.
So I got that job. I was applying for just a bunch of different computer science internships and jobs in the Houston area. And I just kind of like went on like the job sites like Glassdoor, and then Google actually has this really nice search feature for jobs where they compile all the sites. There's like
Mm.
ZipRecruiter and Glassdoor and a bunch of others. And I would just kind of go on Google's job search and I would just search for tech jobs, and I would just kind of apply for like everything. So I probably applied for like over 200 jobs, and I got quite a few of them. I probably got like over 15. And then I just took the one that was closest to me and highest paying. And I ended up being Code Ninjas. And it's worked out super, super well for me because when I first got hired, I was just a tutor. But I've been working there for about a year now, and I do a lot more for just like my region's area. So I do all the IT stuff. So I've been able to direct computer hardware purchases of over 200 different computers. I get to repair a bunch of cool tech stuff, and then design really cool things like a parent portal website and a parent portal app for Code Ninjas. And it's turned from like a $10 an hour job to a $25 an hour
Hmm.
job,
Wow.
and that's just been a really good outcome for me, I guess, as a high school student.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear that you can do some of these, employed positions that also allow for room for advancement or improvement. Because I find some of the tutoring jobs, if you want to make more money, you have to go independent or private, and you kind of hit an entry level ceiling right away. And so it's nice to hear that, yeah, there's opportunities out there for 16, 17, 18-year-olds.
Yeah, I think that like definitely the experience I've heard from other friends I have who have done like Kumon, or man, I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, Kumon, and then test masters and stuff. It
Yeah.
hasn't it hasn't worked out as well for them because they're just really simply designed organizations. Like there's just not much to it. I guess I'm really lucky with Code Ninjas that it's been able to be such an opportunity boon for me, and it's kind of been able to unlock other opportunities. Like a lot of these internships in tech that are in the educational sector, I've been able to apply for and then get. Like I'm not sure if I'm still going to do it because of Corona, but I was going to do an internship with a company called Teacher Graph. That's kind of like a Remind 101 type of thing, and I was able to get that over like college students that are more qualified because I was
Hmm.
able to demonstrate an interest in education. So I definitely think that if you are looking for a high school job, the most important thing is that you try to pick something that's going to build your resume. So like if you want to be a mechanical engineer, working at an auto body shop isn't a bad idea because it just gives you the opportunity to show demonstrable interest when you're applying for higher up or better positions.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because so many students get fixated on these research positions or summer internships when the reality is you could just work sort of like a normal job or a blue collar job that doesn't require a college degree that still has a lot of applicable skills and experiences that you can gain. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Let's switch gears to talk about your application journey and your college list. I think of all of my clients this year, I think you applied to the most schools out of everybody. So let's just talk a little bit about, you don't have to like run down everywhere that you applied, but what was your mindset and logic going into your college search? How did that change? in the fall months once you were doing your application, and then whenever you started receiving your decisions in the spring? Is there anything you might have done differently, or advice that you had received that you wish you had listened to, or anything you would want to share with younger students? Any mistakes you might have made, or best practices that you think you did particularly well?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether or not I would have applied to less schools. I don't know. Like I kind of enjoyed it just from like my perspective of seeing where I got in and where I didn't get in. Um, One thing that I wish I did a better job of that I didn't do a good job of is kind of keeping up with like the social media aspect of it. I really just ignored kind of completely like the forums and everything else because it would have taken too much out of me like to keep up with. And I know that a lot of my friends did keep more up with it. And like I think that some of my friends that had really like the outcomes they wanted or really close to the outcomes they wanted did a lot of things like private message people who got into the programs they wanted and have conversations with them. Um, and just they were just super active in like in the admissions process. And I just don't think that I did that. And that's the only thing I really change. I
Mm,
really wish that I just spent more time, more effort on social media stuff. But just me as a person, I didn't have an Instagram account until 2 months ago. Uh, I didn't, I know, I don't have Snapchat, never used it. I just never used social media. Like I'm not a Reddit person. I never had a reason to use it or a need to use it. I'm a Stack Overflow kind of guy. So that was my social media. And I do Quora too. I like
oh,
Quora,
core is a good one. Yeah, for sure.
but I just didn't like I'm still trying to get better at that. Like the whole social media thing is just something that I was very poor at that I wish maybe I just wish that I knew better how to navigate it. Like if you ask me right now how I would go on Reddit and then private message someone, I still have no idea how to do it.
Mm,
And I just wish that maybe I had more of those skills. And
yeah.
that's all I can really say or think of.
It's something I can relate with. I'm not particularly technology savvy, or like I was a late adopter of Facebook. I was a late adopter of MySpace way back in the day. So yeah, I can relate to your hesitations and reservations there. I think with the social media, it can be just striking that balance between seeing what it's really good for while minimizing some of like the time suck and anxiety impacts that can come from it. So it's probably not the worst thing in the world that you've sort of stayed away from that universe, because it can, yeah, it can be a real mixed bag. There can be some really good information, but also a lot of misinformation and anxiety. So you're probably in the minority there. I have to imagine most students are using social media or some of these online communities. So let's talk a little bit about the workload of what it was like. I remember when we first started working, and you had a college list, about 18 or 20 schools. I feel like did you apply to that many when it was all said and done?
Man, let me go through. I'm just gonna go through them. I listed them all out for this call.
Okay,
So
all right. For the sake of it, all right. Let's run it
yeah,
down.
yeah. So okay, I was accepted to Purdue, UT Austin, Georgia Tech, and Notre Dame. I was waitlisted at UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Cornell, Duke, Berkeley, University of Michigan, which was out of all of mine, the one I was most shocked by. And
Yeah,
then
that Michigan was a surprise for sure.
Carnegie Mellon. I was denied from Stanford, University of Washington, and MIT.
Hmm. So it ended up being
I
about
did not
15
join any of the
schools.
waitlists.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was so I remember up front we started working together. I think in like September, early September, mid September, something like that. And the advice I had given to you is to treat your applications as if it's a part time job or a like just an extra class that you're taking at school. Can you share a little bit about how you managed your time and whether that advice is something you would give to somebody else or that you would modify, and just like how much effort did it take to get all of this stuff done and submit your best applications?
So the beginning was a lot of work. So the beginning for the UT application, the common application essay, the coalition essay, and then the Berkeley essays was a lot. And that I remember being a lot. And I definitely think that the advice treating it like a part-time job was good advice. Um, the way I really managed it is that I would just work on them in my free time. So like I had a lot of free time. I was taking a class. I think this is probably similar to a lot of kids who are going to use your services. I have taken AP tests that I got a 5 on that I ended up taking the class for afterwards for the GPA points. So, like psychology was like that for me. And I had one other class that was like that, where I was just really sitting in the class just to get the 5.0 on my GPA and for no other reason.
Mm.
So those classes where I had nothing to do, I bring my laptop to school every day and I would just sit in the class and I would just type it up um, and finish that out. And then I'd do it when I got home uh, after school or something. I'd write it up and then I'd usually email it to you and we start the feedback process there. And then once we got through the first few schools, it was a lot of copy, paste, rework, edit, reorder. And that became just honestly pretty straightforward and easy. It became almost like a cookie cutter process over time.
Yep.
And I really liked all of my essays and applications. I think my favorite of them all was my Berkeley essays, and then
Mm.
second was my Stanford essays. And yeah, I just worked through them. I mean, and it worked out. And I definitely think that the advice of part-time job was good advice.
Cool. Yeah, it's hard for me sometimes to put myself in the shoes of some of my students because my lived experience of when I was in high school was just so different than the environment that a lot of you guys are raised in. And so it can be hard for me to sort of figure out how to communicate the type of workload without necessarily knowing each student's like hour by hour schedule or what their workload is. Because some students are genuinely like so busy that they're sending me emails at 2 in the morning because it's the only time that they can find. And so, yeah, I think just trying to do it a little bit at a time. And I think it's also what I've seen working with dozens of students now is like those first drafts. Like once you get the first drafts done and once you finish the first university, right? As you say, you're almost like halfway there if you have all of this nationwide scope because it's just like many universities are asking like talk about why you want to study computer science or like share a time when you solved a problem or like what's an interest that keeps you up at night or whatever. And so yeah, I think it's definitely like that hump, and I think getting started is a place where a lot of students really get caught up. So, um, yeah, so it's good that you kind of powered through that first few weeks there because I know it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I guess like one thing that you just said that really struck me was how different your experience would be from someone of like, I don't know, someone around my age, or I guess I'd say like my era. And I definitely just feel like, I guess for me, high school's really kind of felt like this, I guess like hamster wheel
Mm.
where I've kind of just been, I felt like, especially towards my sophomore, junior, senior year, after I was a freshman, it just kind of felt like I was just spinning this wheel. And I think that for a lot of students, and this might not be true for everybody, but for a lot of students, once you figure out like what that wheel is, and every school's different, every kind of place is different, but at least like once I figured out like the mechanisms of my high school, like I don't know, once I came to understand that like things like test banks existed and I could buy an AP review book and I could find a practice ACT online or I could go to Khan Academy. Like once I got those things and then I was able to just implement them in my early on classes sophomore year, by like this time, by the time I'm a senior, I feel so adjusted to the system that it's become a kind of autopilot. So I guess that's just like, I'm saying that because I think that that's relevant for a lot of students who are going through it right now to just know that um, like that feeling does stink. And I think that it does end. And I think that the college admissions process kind of opened that up for me because when I was writing these essays, it reinforced that the experiences I had on autopilot didn't matter as much as the meaningful experiences that I really strove to get.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Can you share a little bit more about what you were doing in your spare time and your leisure time? I feel like, and I'll share his application on my blog and also on my YouTube channel, so my viewers out there can see exactly what the essays were. But I feel like your application was fairly unique because you applied for computer science, but you didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about your like nuts and bolts resume activities or the things that you had done formally as part of your class. And so, can you talk about how you were supplementing your like understanding you have to play this game and run on this hamster wheel? Like, what were you doing to find meaning and purpose, to explore your own curiosities and interests that as kind of a counterweight to this school system?
For me, speech and debate was a big one. I really enjoyed that. I really just enjoyed the idea of like being able to express my ideas and things in speeches. My main events were extemporaneous speaking and formative debate, which, if you're a student who's in debate or knows about it, are kind of the events nowadays that I feel like you have the most creativity to express your own opinion or your own ideas about what you think is important. And then I also participated in UIL journalism, which was really big. And then I felt like the most meaningful social experiences I had was through the sport I played, which was lacrosse. And lacrosse for me was just a huge part of my life, probably up until my junior year when I had a bad injury. But um, like those guys were really kind of like family to me throughout high school. And that was where like going there and being with them, and they weren't academically minded students like my debate friends were. So being able to hang out with these like less, being able to hang out in a world that wasn't so defined by what I was doing at school or by what colleges I wanted to eventually get into or what career I wanted to have was definitely the most freeing experience I had throughout high school. Just the ability to have an activity where you got away. Because I think that activities like robotics and debate are essentially focused on building experience for a college resume or for a an eventual job, and they're not so much focused on just having fun and building skills.
Do you think there's a bit of a disconnect between what universities say that they want in a student and the sorts of activities that seem to help a student gain admission? And if there's a separation between, as you say, things that are sort of intended to be for the resume and then just sort of having fun in an unstructured way? For example, I think this is fairly common with band and choir students, because they're spending, 10, 15, 20, 30 hours, sometimes more a week committed to their activities, spending hundreds of hours a year. And then there's not kind of a requisite payoff in the college admissions process that seems to give preference to, the internships and the research experience and some of these more kind of esoteric or not as easily accessible activities. And so do you like, what's the time management balance there in terms of like playing lacrosse just because you really really like it without without regards to the opportunity cost of what you could be doing in your other time?
I feel like, so like on what you said, I definitely think there's this major disconnect. And I think there's a reason for why the disconnect exists. And it comes back to this principle that I frequently use for when I do search engine optimization as a freelance, like for a freelance job, or trying to game the social media algorithm to make your post higher ranked. As when we aspire to hit a metric, that metric ceases to have actual value. So a great example of that on YouTube is that YouTube for a long time used the number of comments a video had as a way to measure engagement. And videos with more comments would get pushed up higher in the algorithm. So
Hmm.
you'd find YouTubers after discovering that saying things like, leave a comment with a question, or if you
Hmm.
comment on this video, I'll enroll you in this raffle. And once that started happening, comments being a measure of engagement ceased to be a positive thing. And then YouTube changed it to notification bell, and they keep changing it over and over again now. And their goal in changing it is that they want to have metrics people aren't aspiring to. And I think that the college admissions process is like that, where these colleges say they want one thing, and maybe for the first year they said that it was actually true. But then once that became the metric students tried to hit, it ceased to have meaning. So now there's just so many Eagle Scouts. There's so many kids who do
Yeah.
choir and orchestra. There's so many perfect scorers that those metrics no longer have meaning. And they're forced to look at metrics that kids don't know about so much, like the research opportunity, like, competitive programming or whatever nuance. I know for business, there's like a business competition thing. And at my school, very few kids know about it. It's dominated by a particular community of kids with a particular set of parents. And those things are metrics that these schools are still using to have value to them because they're more rare. So because large swaths of students aren't trying to hit this metric is valuable. And I just think that those are the metrics colleges use. And then they use the things that people can't control. So I think that gender and ethnicity also plays a role, because as much as you want to aspire to those metrics, you can't hit them no matter what you do. So those have intrinsic value. And maybe that's me being overly cynical, or maybe it's me approaching it with too much of a computer science mindset. But that is what I feel like is true about the process, having gone through it.
Yeah, I think you're hitting a couple nails there on the head, and I appreciate you sharing your observations. I think your application in particular was pretty interesting because you had robotics, but you didn't really, and you had, of course, your job working at Code Ninjas, but you didn't have like the laundry list of computer science UIL or like all of these other resume bullet points that might turn up. And instead, you had like a ton of different independent projects. Like I think you had over like 500 hours of just stuff that you had been doing in your spare time, right? Since basically middle school. And then your essays, you talked a lot about those things. And you talked a lot about your hobbies and interests that didn't necessarily, that to me demonstrate that there is some authenticity and some sincerity about wanting to help your dad fix the car, right? Like you talk a lot about like that was actually one of my favorite essays was your common application essay about helping like you and your dad working together to fix the Cougar. Because universities say that they want go-getters, people that take initiative, those who are intrinsically motivated, that are curious. And then, as you say, the tools with which to measure those very intangible characteristics can sometimes like very much miss the mark. And I feel like maybe if you want to talk a little bit about in your essays how you approach those different biases, I think especially in your UT diversity short answer, you sort of called out, and I think on your major short answer as well. Can you share a little bit about how you communicated that mindset and some of those, like acknowledging those biases and how you confronted those biases and assumptions that your reviewers probably have?
I forget the exact line, but I think there was one line that we used in multiple essays, and it was the way that I think that I try to confront it was just to say that, like, look, growing up, I didn't know these opportunities existed, and I just did the things that I thought were cool and that I felt like helped me to grow my skills and, interests and complexity as a person. And I just chose those things because they were what I saw, knew about, and felt good about doing. And I wasn't choosing those things because of some like long-term goal for college applications. And, and even if I was choosing them for some long-term, I think we addressed this point as well. It's like, and the way I kind of tried to like prove that, or like my evidence for that, was just to show the things I did and how they weren't the cookie cutter things that I felt like I would have done if I was trying to build myself for college admission specifically. Like writing about building like the Cougar, or writing about my personal projects that are in the large scheme of things useless. Yeah. Or writing about my or like, I don't know, my Berkeley essay was one of my favorites, where I wrote about having to melt the plastic to fit in that specialized torque bit screw hole. And like melting a plastic spoon or toothbrush is what it was, to get into the special torque bit. And I try to just talk about like these organic experiences I had, less so than like a STEM field trip I went on, or something, or
like your summer camp that you went to, or like whatever, like prepackaged experience, right?
Yeah, because I just didn't, and the reason, and I felt like, and it's true that I had to do that because I didn't have the prepackaged experiences. So
yep.
Something that I both chose to do, but also kind of had to do.
Yeah, it's true. I will talk about this in future blog posts, where if you're applying for a STEM program, especially for computer science, and especially if your academics are anything less than perfect, if you don't have some like extensive list of resume activities, like you're going to have to think outside the box a little bit and be a little bit more unconventional. I think even in your diversity short answer, you were like, I run like a sub 5 minute like mile,
I
like
do.
I'm an Eagle Scout, like I, you know, like you're like I just do stuff besides sit behind a computer all day, and that is absolutely like a stereotype, and you know, it probably has some nuggets of truth that you have kind of the kind of introvert who's solitary that's afraid to be a public speaker that you know isn't going to be playing sports, and you're like I'm just none of those things, and computer science is just one small part of who I am, but it doesn't make up the totality of my identity. And I think, what do you think about that approach overall? Like, I know we wouldn't have changed anything, but how do you think this kind of generalist approach works compared to other applicants who are applying with these like highly specialized resumes? Do you think that played a role in some of like the waitlist offers you got that were a little bit surprising?
Um, Man, that's hard to say. So actually, I would say no. The waitlist offers that I got that were surprising, I felt like I got because I was applying to state schools who had requirements for state admissions, not priority. So like Michigan is one of those that I felt that way about. And I actually, so, you know, my parents, so, okay, I want to preface the Michigan thing because Michigan actually gave me some insight. So both my parents are Michigan alumni, like both. Um, and when I got waitlisted, my parents were decently upset, especially my dad, because he's donated a lot of money to the school over the years,
Hmm.
and and I would have been a legacy, so he was just upset. So he called the admissions office and he was asked them about it, and they were just like, "We we offered too many priority, we offered too many spots early on in admission," and that was all it was. They just didn't have spots left,
Sure.
and that's why I got waitlisted. And they had to take a certain number of students from in-state, and that becomes so a school that doesn't have to do that is Berkeley, but Michigan does. They have a ratio they have to keep for in-state students. UT does as well. University of Washington does, and as a result of that, if it's a competitive major like computer science, or I don't know what all the competitive majors are. I just know the computer science is like one of the ones that's up there. Then they're getting so many qualified students that it just becomes too hard to deny them in state. Like, because you know, there's probably 500 kids in Michigan that have perfect scores. And if you assume that a lot of them want to do the top majors, the top fields like CS, or I'm sure there's some business majors that are like that, then you could have a scenario where 50 plus kids apply to the CS program with perfect stats. And the school only has a computer science program for 75 kids.
Exactly.
And they let in all 50 of those kids, and they only have 25 spots left when the majority of their applicants are coming from out of state. So the level of competitive you have to be when you're out of state is super high. And then that gets worsened because Michigan's a state where it's pretty homogenous ethnically. So it's hard to get a diverse class from just being in state. So when they're trying to target diversity, the majority of students they have who are of diverse ethnic backgrounds are going to come from out of state. And when you are not of one of those ethnic diverse backgrounds and you're applying out of state, it becomes even harder.
Yeah, I think you see the reverse as well with out of state students trying to go to UT Austin's competitive majors. I think Michigan in particular. So, fun fact: the former director of UT admissions, Kedra Ishap, Dr. Ishap, I believe she's still the director of admissions at the University of Michigan. So,
Hmm.
she was my boss, like boss's boss's boss, and she was the director who was in charge during the Fisher versus UT Austin affirmative action race and admission Supreme Court case in 2013. And I think she left shortly after the first ruling. But Michigan, what they do, not so much on the admission side of admitting more or less like students of color, is on the recruiting side, because it's super hard to recruit out of state students, especially in a state like Michigan where you have a decreasing pool of high school graduates. There's just simply slightly less kids graduating each year. So many states, I think the majority of US states, are having a declining pool of high school seniors to draw from. So yeah, I think you're right that in addition to needing to go outside the boundaries like they're having to recruit, also meet these same kind of criteria for enrolling a diverse class. And so that also just depends on the major itself. Like I'm sure if you applied for like history or something, you probably would have gotten in. But there's just like so many people that want to go for CS that like I think your outcomes are a very good example of, if you want to go CS, then you do have to cast a wide net, and you also have to be super realistic about your admissions outcomes. Like I get families every year, you know, like, oh, like good, smart kids, top 10%, 1480, wanting to apply to computer science programs. And like the reality is a lot of these schools they just don't have space because there's so many highly qualified students. who want to go to UT as an out-of-state student, or even with UT honors, like touring, for example. It's just like it's insanely competitive, and it's just hard to understand that on the front end until you actually get your admissions decisions and see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and this is as a PSA to any computer science student out there. Do USACA. Even if it's the beginning of your senior year, you have enough time to get, they call it USACA Gold, or higher in just a few months before you're applying. And this, I should have said this in the beginning when you asked me what I would have done differently. So Turing was my number one. And I had no idea what Turing looked for. And I have a pretty good idea of what they look for now. It's the competitive programming with heavy emphasis on USACA, not so much UIL. If you want, this is a PSA to kids wanting Turing. And the sad part is that if I say this, then you say this, and then it goes up on Reddit.
And then 2 years from now, yeah, like they're going to move the metric again.
Because everyone's going to be USACA Gold, right? So the reason why it's valuable now is because few students do it because no one knows it exists. But if you are trying to get into Turing, it is like I think that the weight is almost like 80% placed on USACA. Like, because so in the Katy area, we got 7 high schools. As far as I know, no one from my high school got into Turing, but at Seven Lakes and Cinco Ranch, which are 2 schools who have dedicated clubs for USACA, all the kids who were USACA Plat and higher got in. Not a single one who was USACA Plat didn't get in. And several of them had worse stats than I did. So I know kids, the one kid with a 33 ACT got into Turing, and I think it's mostly because of USACA Plat.
What was their rank? Were they ranked like 1-2% as well?
No, they were ranked. They were barely top 6, I think. They were like
wow, that's very rare then for someone in Turing to get in outside the top 5%. Yeah, that's almost unheard of.
I don't know. I guess that for me this year, just hearing these kids' outcomes, I felt like it wasn't that unheard of because I think that what happens with Turing a lot of times, maybe I'm wrong, but like my assumption is that a bunch of kids apply, kids with certain stats are going to get their stuff read and their application seen by the person in charge of Turing admissions. So just like the regular admissions officer. I don't know exactly what the process is, but my assumption is that if you're at the point where your application's getting read and the person reading it sees that you're USACA, and then I think UIL is a secondary benefit to that. And there's other things like HackerRank and then other large hackathon competitions. Those are just weighted super highly. And my reasoning for that mentally is just that they have low amounts of participation, meaning that the odds of getting a kid like me with a bunch of side CS projects is probably high. I think a lot of kids do what I did, where they just have a bunch of like cool things they made. But there's a very low amount of kids that were high ranked in USACA or high ranked at 3 different hackathon events, because they're just not metrics that most people are striving for, so they become valuable intrinsically.
And it's just a tough balance. It can be such a moving target, especially in the STEM space. I feel like every other year there's some like new international robotics competition that I had never heard of before. And like, I don't think there's any silver bullet resume activities, for example, but I do think, as you're saying, that if you really want to get into these top tier programs, Turing or Carnegie Mellon or some of these, top 10 programs, it just isn't enough to be academically stellar and to be very well rounded and to have these independent interests. To me, it's good enough for regular admission to CS, UT. You're going to get into A&M honors or something like that. But yeah, it's, my rule of thumb is national, international level competitions. And if you don't have that in Turing, like UIL state's not enough. I agree there. And so I'm very bearish on Turing just because I don't know what the process is. I think they only admit 40 or 50 kids, and there's probably 800 or 1,000 applicants to Turing. And so just again, the numbers are just so narrow that, Turing admits are often probably weighing, most selective universities at, Stanford or Caltech or MIT or something. Probably not all, but that's the kind of selectivity that, is required to bypass or get through some of those gates and filters. It's just a crapshoot,
Yeah, and then because Turing is my dream program, and it's not something I'm sure I'll do now. But one thing that's cool with UT that makes Turing contrast other honors programs is that they let in. So the program usually consists of 80 kids total per class, because from what I understand, because I emailed the Turing person after getting into UT and not getting into Turing, since you can get into Turing after the first semester of your freshman year. And they explain what they look for in a very straightforward way for that process. They want you to petition for honors classes, and they want to see high activity and high grades in your CS classes specifically, not so much your overall classes. And from what I understand from what they were saying, if you're a student like me who is probably going to excel in those classes and might make a decision where, like, I think that the entry level course is 302H, and I have credit for that from AP Computer Science 1. If I did something like choosing, this is what the advisor was telling me. If I do something where I don't take my AP credit and just take that class for the easy, super high grade, my odds of turning are higher. Now, like whether or
Hmm.
not that's worth that, you have to weigh. But from what they told me, they let in 50 kids, 50 kids total. I don't know how many actually choose to attend the school. But they let in 50 from the application pool as high schoolers going into your freshman year, and that's the majority of kids that are in the program. Then they usually have let in about 30 more out of the kids that are actually attending
Hmm.
or in the CS major at UT
Yeah, keep me
after the first semester.
keep me posted on how that transfer works, because I always have families every year, of course, that don't get into touring. They're still going to go to UT. It's good that you're getting some transparent and actionable advice, because sometimes the counsel from official sources can be a mixed bag. You just don't know what's expected of you. So definitely fill me in. Let me know what that journey looks like. Another interesting statistic that National Science has released is that about 50% of students who attempt UT students who attempt a major change into computer science gain admission, which
What?
was much higher than I thought. Because the external transfer process going from one university into CS is like almost impossible. Like I don't even work with CS clients anymore unless they're like 4.0 superstars. Um, but
That's
yeah, it's like
crazy.
it's public information, so it sort of suggests to me again this kind of potential mismatch, because we've talked about this disconnect between what admissions reviewers and universities say that they want, the sorts of students that they um, that kind of preferences for at the high school level. But then I have to imagine there's a mismatch where you've got students who may or may not have been doing all of these intensive computer science stuff. They're 18 or 19, exploring all their different options at UT, and then they just like realize either they don't truly have the aptitude to keep up with some of the top and skilled programmers, or they just don't like it, or they're like, oh well, I've grown out of this and I just want to do something else. And so yeah, it was pretty shocking to me that they were admitting half of internal transfers, because that means a lot of people were transferring out of computer science. So I don't know if it was just a pure skill and difficulty thing, or what's. I would be curious, like the whatever the retention mechanics are there. But that is good to know that there is a pipeline to get into touring, because even if they're taking in 30 or so kids, that's definitely higher than I would have thought. So it's good to know that that's at least a possibility if you get a 4.0 and do what's expected of you.
It seems honestly, it seems super straightforward, but at the same time, so I don't know if this stat is public, but from what I heard talking to them, the majority of students in Turing don't actually finish the program. Like, because to finish Turing, the difference between that and regular CS is honors classes and then a thesis at the end. But a lot of kids who are in CS just don't have any desire to do the thesis. So they don't get the Turing degree. So where Turing really has value is it's mostly in your freshman year, where you're getting special access to career fairs, and then you're getting internship opportunities that other students don't get, because as a freshman you have this like bonus plus mark on your GPA, on your resume, that other kids don't. But then when you're a sophomore at UT or in your second year, if you have a GPA above, I think their cutoff for the CS fairs or job fairs for like the elite ones is like 3.2. So if you have a GPA above 3.2, you get invited to all the Turing events anyways.
Hmm.
So it stops having value and the students don't finish the program, which is why I kind of have to evaluate whether it's even worth entering the program after I'm already at the school, since most of the value of it have already passed, and I just have this extra stressor of harder classes. So I don't know. It's just for kids who are interested in Turing. It is a mixed bag, and just details that you can consider if you're watching this.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your, because I think you're asking a lot of the right questions, and so much of this stuff is just hypothetical until you actually arrive on campus.
Mhm.
Reading reports from current UTCS students is, they say touring of all the honors programs, like touring and engineering honors seem to sort of make the least difference in terms of the added value or curricular opportunities that are provided. And so, it just depends. And I have to imagine a lot of like junior, senior CS grads are just like, they're already probably working, they're probably already making like decent money, and they probably already have job opportunities lined up. So it's like, why jump through the hoops of doing a thesis unless you were like planning to publish that or spin it off into like a startup or some sort of app or some kind of like applied thing. That's another thing about the honors programs that a lot of students don't realize, that I think almost all of them have a thesis requirement that is not the right fit. Like when I applied for UT, I applied liberal arts honors, and one reason I did was specifically because they did not have a thesis component, whereas Plan 2 honors does. And it was only after like the end of my sophomore year that I developed a research topic. And then I decided, okay, I really want to do a thesis. I really want to do undergraduate research. But I had to sort of go the other way around. Instead of saying I need to do a thesis and then find a topic to match that thesis, instead it's like I developed an area of interest, and the thesis undergraduate research is the vehicle to express that and to sort of have a structure around to study things further and also open up some of these doors. Because if you are doing undergraduate research and you have a thesis project, that could help you get work in a lab or help you connect with the professor, or give you some demonstrated interest for like having a valid reason to go into a graduate elective, for example, if that isn't offered at the undergraduate level. So that's something that I find another bias. It's kind of like a planning bias where, and it's adults are the same way, but certainly 18-year-old kids, pressure from their parents and their teachers and society in general. They want to try and like A, B, C, D, plan out their lives. They don't get touring, and then suddenly like plan A is out the window. But it's like, well, you just kind of have to live your life and then figure it out as you go. And the most important thing is to keep asking those questions, because so much of this is not going to be resolved until you get to campus, assuming we're in campus on the fall, given coronavirus. So
Yeah, I mean, I just think you're totally on the ball with that. I know for me at least, getting a turning felt like a really big deal initially. And then, I don't know, I guess just researching the opportunities. And then I got lucky enough that Code Ninjas actually hired a current UT student who's interning. So being able to talk to him and get his firsthand turning experience kind of just changed my mind about exactly what it meant to be a part of that particular program, and then how you could manage to eke out the benefits without being a part of it. And just being able to talk to him like person to person, and just being able to take what he said, then do my own research, allowed me to be like, okay, so I don't have turning, so how am I going to try to do something else? And I think it's just a process that, I think that you should be calm if you have to go through that process. I don't think it's something that if you're a student right now, you should stress out about. Like there's a million and one ways to get to the same place. And if you can't get there one way, you'll be able to find another way if you're determined.
yeah, I agree. And I especially see that in the spring, where I will see students that will really overweight the importance of honors in deciding not to enroll at UT Austin. So they're like, I didn't get freshman honors, therefore, like I'm not going to be successful. I'm going to get lost at the university. I'm not going to have access to academic advisors. They kind of have this kind of death, like worst case scenario mentality, when, as you exactly say, that there's so many different ways to succeed at a place like UT Austin. And if you're an intrinsically motivated student where you have a good match for your academic program, like you're going to be fine. Like you're going to have professors take an interest in you. You're going to make friends. You're going to be part of student organizations or find those internships. Because even in the honors programs, like people aren't going to hold your hand either. Like you still have to go and do the work and go to class, and UT is still a big place. And so honors is also not like this kind of silver bullet, guaranteed ticket to success, or some like automatically more enriching experience at UT Austin. Because I definitely had friends in honors and Plan 2 and LAH and humanities, what I did junior, senior year, that just like didn't do anything with it. Like they enrolled and like they didn't go to the meetings, they didn't do stuff, they didn't use it. So it's like anything else, if you are given access to a resource that you don't utilize, then simply having it on your resume, just like as a high school student, is not sufficient to making you a more compelling internship applicant, or just even a more well-rounded person who's maximizing the resources in their environment. So those are the sorts of mentality things that I wish universities could somehow measure for more accurately and more precisely, instead of playing this like dodging bullet, like trying to guess what a given university or program is going to offer for a return on investment, for example. Do you want to share a little bit about how you ultimately decided to enroll at UT, and what your considerations were in terms of how much an out-of-state education would cost versus potential job prospects, and what your thought process were to eventually enroll?
Okay, so that was actually a really big deal for me because I was able to get into Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is higher ranked than UT for CS. And then I was able to get waitlisted at a bunch of those other schools. And all the average salary data, like even for percentiles and everything, is public through the IRS. So you can really get like the governmental data on what people who just finished a year of high school make salary wise. Now, the only issue with that data is that it's only for students who take out student loans. So you're not seeing everybody, you're only seeing
Mm.
students who took out federal student loans. If you are a CS major like myself, there's an API that you can use to access and pull that data. So I had pulled that data, and then I had pulled other data like average cost of living in different cities. And then out of the top 100 tech companies, where the majority of them hire from, and what salary each company. And then I took the average salary data and the cost of living data and the where I would likely get a job at like which company data, and then the average salary data, and I kind of combined them into probability paths for what I would get going to each university. And like that's so complicated, but I was like really, it was kind of just like a fun project for me in some ways.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So you have the
like
data. There's some analytical hypothesis that you can evaluate. If you just do the right inputs and make the right assumptions, you'll get these outputs that will tell you something in a quantitative way, right?
right, and I had just finished this like book. It was like an O'Reilly data science book, so I like had learned all these cool things, and I was like, oh, okay, I can apply this. Like it was literally like a hobbyist project. So it's not. I wasn't doing it out of like this stress. I need to know. Like
Mm.
it was more just like let me do it. And I did that, and um, in most cases, my ROI was somewhere between 8 and 15 years, and then
What do you mean by that? Could you clarify 8 to 15
so my
years?
return on investment. So like, okay, so UT is going to cost me $11,000 a year in tuition, and then in my particular case, I'm actually able to purchase a condo near UT, which has become exponentially cheaper due to coronavirus, and then I would say more valuable due to not probably wanting to live in like communal living scenarios with like this virus, something more desirable to students. And I was able, and I knew I'd be able to secure a condo in UT. The reason why that's important is because it really factored into my cost evaluation, because typically you're going to be spending about $10,000 a year, if not more or slightly less, in your housing. But at UT, I really wouldn't be spending that money since through purchasing the condominium, the amount of money I get through expected appreciation and value, and when I would sell it at the end of 4 years, would kind of negate that cost and even let me make a bit of a profit, given that I had friends who I knew would help me pay the mortgage payment for that condominium. Um, and as a result of that, UT became an extremely, extremely cheap option for
Mm.
me. So UT, I expect to graduate in 3 years instead of four, which wasn't going to be true for Berkeley or Stanford. And then in those 3 years, I'd really just be paying the cost of tuition, which for me was a little bit over $13,000. So I would literally graduate from UT for 40 grand. In contrast, if I was to have gone to I'm going to use Stanford as my example because I think that was like my number one out of state school. Berkeley was like a close second for me. If I were to go to Stanford, my total cost for each year would have been $71,000. And then for 4 years, I wouldn't have been able to graduate early. They just don't accept enough of my AP credits or give me enough credit hours for each AP
Mm.
credit or test I took. So my total cost there would have been 284,000 versus 40. So now for my ROI, I had to figure out if I were to make $10,000 more a year for graduating from Stanford instead of UT, then how long is it going to take me before going to Stanford pays off? And if you're only going to make 10 grand a year, then obviously it's going to take you over 10 years, just looking at that math. But there's so much more that goes into it because if you go to UT Austin, your odds of graduating and getting a job in Austin are decently higher than someone who goes to Stanford. They're probably going to get a job in the California area or somewhere else near the West Coast, maybe Seattle. And the cost of living in those cities
Mm.
is a magnitude higher than the cost of living in Austin. And as a CS student, both those cities are major probabilities. And you also have places like Boulder, Colorado, and then several smaller tech hubs that are hiring more out of UT than they are out of those places on the West Coast. Now, the places on the West Coast pay more money, but you have higher cost of living. So if you go to Stanford and you get a job at Google, where you're going to be making $120,000 a year post graduation, but your cost of living is also $20,000 a year higher, your ROI is zilch. Like you'll never pay off Berkeley. So I had to factor those things in and calculating my ROI. And in my scenario where I don't have this big desire to be in Silicon Valley or to be in California or even Seattle, and I would probably be happier living in Austin or Boulder, Colorado, or Colorado Springs, or maybe one of these smaller towns in the Midwest that are still tech hubs. It just made no sense economically for me. Like my payoff rate in the best case scenarios were usually 8 years, and in the worst scenarios it was 15 years plus. And then once I accounted for the fact that if I decided being in the West Coast or being in Seattle really mattered to me, and then I was going to do something like get a master's degree that would set me up for one of those locations, the ROI became never. Like it just never would have paid off. And that's why I think even if I'd gotten into Stanford, I would have ended up choosing UT. Just because my return on investment for Stanford became like 12 years in my data analysis. And I just didn't want to be stressing out and paying about that debt for 12 years. Just didn't make sense.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely effective approach that you've taken here to sort of detach yourself from the subjective feelings of, oh, I want to go to Stanford, or the prestige attached to going to somewhere like Berkeley, and to really like break down what the variables are and forecast what the different opportunities or options are going to look like. I find there's just such a massive bias. I don't know if it's at your high school in particular, but absolutely, these prestigious universities being the Rolex of like it's a watch that tells time, right? Like there's just so much attachment, and a lot of it's coming from not always with the best interest in mind to developing yourself as a person or a future professional. And it's interesting, and for sure do get cases every year of students that do get admitted to these big time universities that will end up choosing their local state option because they got a full ride scholarship. And that's something that a lot of students, and it's just so hard to realize at 18. I understand, just it's just inconceivably difficult to imagine what your life will look like in 5 years, or what you want to do, or maybe you change your major, or maybe you transfer universities. But if you're paying a massive premium to navigate those uncertain questions at $70,000 a year at Stanford, or comparable cost at UC Berkeley or Southern California, like I have adult friends who are in exactly that category that even have employable skills that are still paying off, high 5 figures, 6 figures debt from their undergraduate degree, because they're paying a massive premium to like find themselves and like explore, which is all super fine, but you don't have to pay $70,000 a year to do that. And I think just overall, one piece of advice, or one sort of thing I'm going to do differently this year in my conversations with families that I think you and I definitely had. I think cost was a little bit less of an issue in your situation, but I'm just upfront with parents now. It's like, look, unless you guys have got $250,000 to set aside for some of these universities, like you're not going to get scholarship money from UC Berkeley. Like you're not going to get scholarship money from Michigan. Like if you're a middle high income family, like you're just not going to get merit aid for most of these places. And if you've got younger siblings in the pipeline, it just my subjective intuition about the return on investment for living in Silicon Valley or Berkeley or Los Angeles seems it just doesn't seem to pass the smell test. And obviously you've crunched the numbers and done the data. And even if you were just sort of a normal cost of attendance at UT, 4-year degree, $110,000, like that ROI, it's still like, you're just in such a better position, and graduating with substantial amounts of student loan debt, even if you went to Harvard or MIT, it's just going to limit and be just like this ball and chain opportunity cost in the future, particularly with how uncertain we are in the era of coronavirus and what the world economy is going to look like in 3 or 5 or 10 years. Like, to me, it just seems ever more critical to just try and graduate with the least amount of projected debt possible. So for me, like that just seems like the most critical variable. And I know students are I've got students that will get full rides to UT Dallas, like turning their noses up at it. And I'm like, I know UT Dallas like isn't the best. Like I know it's not like everyone's dream school, but like if you can graduate with no debt and like some decent skills, like you're going to be fine. And if you want to pivot to California, you could do a graduate degree. And so it's like it's really refreshing to hear you break through a lot of that bias. And that's like the Reddit hive mind. Like these students on Reddit just like throw around these numbers. Oh, it's like it's only $250,000 in debt, and it's like, and everyone is just reinforcing this like, yeah, like follow your dreams and like, yeah, go to California and like get away from your like mean parents and like yeah, it sucks to live in your home state. Like you should move halfway across the country. And I'm like, no, like these are not. This is not like rational, sensible advice. And so, and I stopped trying to fight that battle on Reddit a few years ago. So I'm thankful that at least like you're out there doing this. And so, yeah, hopefully if there's a student out here listening to your perspective, because then you'll get these
Oh,
students
man.
like, they graduate 5 years, from now, and then they're talking about debt and how real it is. And even if you're making six figures at Google, like, yeah, it's just like your life opportunities are so much more constrained. And I feel bad for the parents that want to pay for these educations because they don't want to disappoint their students. So it's like it's so difficult, such a difficult decision to make. So I'm glad you really like took it seriously. You could probably like make a course about like evaluating your ROI on like you could totally spin this into a product, I think.
My friends, so like, okay, I'm gonna say their first names and their last names. So I have a friend named Jose. My close group of friends, like three other dudes. Where I think that three of us have 36s, the other one 35, but he has a 1590. We're like all just elite, quote, quote, students. So Jose got into, he's Hispanic. He's from Ecuador, first generation. He speaks Spanish and German.
Wow.
He memed his essays. Like I read his essays. His MIT essay was absolutely hilarious. He talked about how the defining moment of his life was understanding the chicken came from the egg and not vice versa. And he still got it. And it's like, why? Because he's just that elite. Like for a school that is able to judge diversity and stuff, he's like top caliber.
Yeah, there's just not that many of them. There's maybe like 100 Jose's in the United States, and every university
Right.
wants them, right?
So he's just like he got into MIT, Cornell, Berkeley, um, just the list. Like I don't even know. Like I don't even know if he got into Stanford or not. But he is taking a full ride to UT Dallas. My
Wow.
friend,
Huh. Wow. Good
my
for
friend
him.
Fernando
Huh.
he got into Cornell, and I think he got into Berkeley. Same thing. He's taking the full ride to UT Dallas. Fernando is doing that because he didn't get into UT Austin. Jose did get into UT Austin, but he just wants the full ride instead. He just doesn't see value in it. He's like 99.9% sure he wants to start his own company and just kind of wants like a college experience. Like it doesn't matter to him. And I think that in Fernando's case, he wasn't that determined on it, but just like Jose and I just presenting these numbers and data to him and just being like, look, because for the person whose dream, like absolute dream, is to get a job at Google or to get a job at Boston Robotics, I get it. It makes sense. Like if you got into MIT and your dream is to work at Boston Robotics, do it. Like that makes sense to me. Even if your ROI is like 30 plus years, if that is what you want and you don't think you're gonna change your mind, it makes sense. But if you just want a six-figure job, going to Berkeley or going to Stanford makes no sense because if you get a job at Google, your ROI is forever. Your ROI is almost 20 years because your cost of living is so much higher. If you get a job at a smaller company in like a more affordable area, that's when your ROI is super huge. And because then you're more of like the guy who went to Stanford but works in New Mexico
Oh,
is a
so
commodity.
different. It's a different universe, right?
And that's where your ROI value is. So
Mm.
if you're concerned with having more money, then that's your plan. Like you're going to Berkeley to go to Little Rock, Arizona. That's how you pay it off. That's it. And when you do that, you pay it off in 8 years. It's amazing. And it works out super well. And your path to advancement in those companies is like almost straight to president when you're 35. Like that's where I get it. It makes total sense. But if your plan is just to get a six-figure job and you don't think that you are going to want to climb the corporate ladder in that way, it makes no sense. It just doesn't. If you think you want to work at Google, or if you think you want to work at like a major tech company, do something to change the world, but it doesn't matter to you that it be Google or Apple or Tesla, you'll take any of the three. UT makes perfect sense. Even UT Dallas makes perfect sense. And that's just how like my math worked out, and that's what it showed.
I'll have to talk to you about maybe doing a guest blog post because you've obviously put like a lot more, not necessarily thought, but just your approach. Like this mindset is something I just don't have. I'm not quantitatively minded. I don't know statistics. Like I just, it's all like quite, I understand like conceptually what these things are, but I can't do it myself. So if you ever want to like throw all this down in a blog post, like I definitely guarantee you a few thousand readers would be kind of a nice service to yeah, call into question some of this just this battle that I have to fight every single year. Thankfully, like I say, almost all my families that got into UT are going to UT because for me, it's just like in 99% of cases, like it's just a better deal. I mean, just regardless of discipline, regardless of future professional prospects, like if you're getting into UT regular, even if it's not honors, like to me, it's just it's pretty tough to apply out of state or go out of state or yeah. Yeah, probably one last question. We'll kind of start wrapping things up here. If there was, we've already talked about some of the criticisms of kind of the high school system and some of these, mechanisms of how universities are preferencing or putting metrics out there that students are trying to meet. If you just had like a magic wand, is there like one thing that you would change if you just magically change it overnight and money wasn't an issue or implementation wasn't an issue? What might you change?
Um, I would change the way that research opportunities are offered with like a magic wands. That's what I would do. I just like UT's is a great example. UT offers summer research opportunities that helps. I at least I've heard. I don't know if it's true, but it helps a lot of students get into honors because they get to go talk to a professor, and then when they apply, they mention that professor specifically. When you're doing an application for MIT or Stanford, it actually talks about members of the staff that you're excited to meet and work with. And a lot of kids are just aware, or like they are aware of a way to get into these camps or these. I'm going to call them camps. I don't think they're actual research opportunities, just like camps. These kids who are aware of how to get in these camps and what to do, get to do them. And if I had a magic wand, I would make those camps more affordable because they cost a ton. I did these camps not for academics, for lacrosse. So I've done camps at the University of Michigan, Ohio State, other like top Duke, like top tier lacrosse schools where I was just like on campus for 2 weeks trying out for their lacrosse team. And having the experience makes me think the academic experience is similar, but for a different kind of student, like for an academic student instead of an athletic student. And I wish that they made them more affordable and more accessible. And if I had a magic wand, that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's a great point. A lot of families ask me about these opportunities, and I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how they work. I don't know how you get them. Like, students, they just come to me and they've already done them. I'm like, that's great. And yeah, it does help. It for sure helps in admissions. It for sure helps with content on the essays. And a lot of it just turns out on how much money you have, who your parents know, what their professional network is. And yeah, I totally understand that frustration. And that's another metric that is definitely being preferenced in college admissions that is certainly not accessible across a wide range of people, especially if you're a rural community or you're not even in a city, you're not near major research university, like forget about it. There's an application I'll share later on my blog about from a rural student who actually was able to do some of the NASA camps and do some of the cool stuff, but they really, really had to fight and work to get those opportunities. And like none of their classmates are doing it. None of their teachers knew what to do. Like his high school had like sent one kid to UT in 10 years or something. So yeah, that's definitely probably like an easy solution as well. So if you could find some way to like implement that, I'm sure there's a lot of students who also feel a little bit aggrieved. But anyways, man, well, thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I know you've been busy, doing your like corralling the students on Zoom. And so, yeah, I appreciate you, doing one more Zoom call with me. And look forward to hearing from you and seeing how your time at UT progresses.
Thanks so much. Thank you, you too. Hope this helps any prospective students out.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your time.